Okay, it's 3 minutes after. We are recording this, so anybody that joins late is going to be able to come back and watch any parts of the recording that they missed, but I do want to get rolling because, as I mentioned, I know we're all very busy individuals, and I want to get you back to doing the good things in the world that I'm sure you're up to. So today's webinar is all about SeaPort Next Generation Rolling Admissions number 2. SeaPort NxG came out in 2018, and about every 2 to 3 years, the Navy opens it up for some new bidders. And I'm going to share with you what we know or what we're expecting about this next iteration of the contract. So hopefully that's what you're here to learn about today. If not, you're welcome to stick around anyway. So what we're going to run through today, I'm going to give you a couple of introductions, tell you a little bit about Trident, a little bit about myself, but really we're going to spend most of the time talking about this opportunity, what it's going to take to build a winning proposal, and then how you can prepare for some long-term success on this contract. Because there's some really interesting nuances that I want to make sure you understand about this contract vehicle and what it's designed for. So please, as we're going, feel free to interrupt. This should be a somewhat collaborative session. I want to make sure that your questions get answered. So if something comes up and you need me to talk a little bit more about it, if you need me to drop anchor on a topic, I'm happy to do that. Just pop your question in the chat. I am monitoring that as we go. And then on the slides themselves, if you see these little blue banners, make sure you spend a couple seconds reviewing those because we've highlighted some key takeaways that we want to make sure that we foot stomp and emphasize as we're going through this presentation today. So with that, onto our introductions. Trident is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. We are based in SoCal. As I mentioned, I am in Hawaii. When I started with Trident, I did actually live in San Diego. And really our core focus is to help government contractors identify, position for, and win government contracts through our professional staff that provides quality service. One of the really unique things about Trident is that we are committed to creating flexible and portable job opportunities for drilling reservists, veterans, and spouses of active duty military all over the world. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about my background. Core values is another thing that kind of sets us apart, but we really pride ourselves on our military level professionalism, our teamwork, being accountable and responsible, delivering value to our clients, and maintaining a sense of balance. And I would be happy to talk to you in depth about each of those core values and what it's like to be a Tridentier, as our chief operations officer calls us. But I know you're here to learn about SeaPort. So if you have any questions about Trident, I'm happy to hang on at the end and just tell you a little bit more about who we are and what we do. But you're going to get a taste of it during this webinar. So as I mentioned, we are a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. We were founded in 2008 by a Navy SEAL, actually. And we have this globally dispersed team that provides full service business development lifecycle support. So the business intelligence and pipeline development, right? Finding the opportunities that your company should bid on, helping you track those, build out your pipeline, know what you're competitive for, know what you're not competitive for. We help with capture management. So everything you do to prepare for that bid with the client engagement and the posturing and the teaming, the actual proposal development and management. You know, if you've been in this proposal game for any amount of time, you know how quickly 30 days can go. And how stressful it can be to try and put together a compliant, compelling proposal in a short amount of time. We also offer training and advisory. So whether you're in the throes of a proposal or preparing for one, or you've just come off of one and you thought, gosh, I never want to go through that again, we're here for you. So we offer training and advisory services in all of these areas based on what your team needs. And then we do also offer executive and presentation coaching. That's one of the core things that Jeff Everidge, our co-founder and president, offers. If you've not been on a proposal for the government yet that requires these in-person presentations, or even video recorded ones, it's a totally different ballgame than a narrative proposal. So we help you understand what the process looks like, and we help prepare you for those government presentations. The way that we do this is we have a flexible and scalable team that supports both small and large federal contractors. The bulk of what we do is actually within the DoD market, and specifically for Navy, because many of us are Navy veterans or Navy spouses. We have a couple Army folks, and we do have, the Marines are well represented as well on our team. Today, I am Rebecca Wayland. I'm your presenter and fearless guide through this process. I am also Trident's GWAC and multiple agency contract lead. I also assist with all the multiple award IDIQs. I'm Trident's chief of staff, so I help connect resources external to and internal to the company. I'm the co-author of FastProp, which is our signature proposal management process that we really designed for companies that live in the real world with limited resources. So I'll be happy to talk to you more about that. But at a high level view, it's a really straightforward process that breaks down what your critical actions are during a proposal response period. We've got 6 easy steps to follow, and we tell you what you need to do when to keep your team on track. I've got about 10 years of proposal experience. It's all been with Trident. And I have, in this amount of time, worked with all different companies and all different time zones. I mentioned I started in San Diego. After that, I was overseas in Japan for 3 years, kind of doing 24/7 proposal support, right? So we've got this really great model at Trident where, because we're globally dispersed, if you live on the East Coast, you can send your proposals to our West Coast or our overseas companies. And we work on it while you're in bed for the night. And yeah, shout out for San Diego, exactly. And anyway, so we can help expand your proposal calendar because we're working on things during our business day. You're getting good rest to make you fresh for your next business day. And we can have these seamless transitions that, like I said, really just expand that 30 days and make the most use of the time. For my background, I am a Naval Academy graduate, also a Navy veteran, and now a Navy spouse, which is why I'm in Hawaii. So, after Japan, we actually did a stint at the Pentagon, and now I'm here for the foreseeable future. I never want to move again. This was move number, I think, 18 for me. So, because I was an Army brat, I would be perfectly happy to grow roots here, but we'll see. Okay, so now to the good stuff with the opportunity overview, right? So what is SeaPort? The Department of the Navy uses this contract vehicle to purchase engineering and professional services, right? That's very basically what it is. They've complicated things a little bit because when you hear SeaPort, sometimes they're talking about the actual contract vehicle. Sometimes they're talking about the actual name of the platform where you go in and you respond to the bid. So it's a dual purpose name there. And really what this does is it encompasses multiple award contracts through task orders issued by 10 Navy commands. These are commands that are directed to use this for certain types of procurements. And there's about 106 ordering offices today. That number goes up and down based on strategic initiatives and funding that's happening behind the scenes with the Navy, but it's a big client base if you're talking about anything professional services related for the Department of the Navy or the Marine Corps. The primary NICS on this contract is the Engineering Services NICS, the 541330. Of note, the revenue size standard on this next rolling admissions is expected to be $47 million. That's up from the $38.5 million that we saw on the last rolling admissions. And under SeaPort, there's no sole source or direct orders allowed for the vendors. So I mentioned the 23 functional categories. We're going to take a look at those in just a minute. And then the 10 big Navy commands they're using them are listed here for you. But really anything related to NAVSEA, NAVAIR, NAVWAR, NAVFAC, NAVSUP, the Marine Corps, and then MSC. Most of that work gets binned under SeaPort. It's not exclusive to SeaPort, right? Like these agencies can still use Oasis or what's going to be Oasis Plus and Alliant 3 for some things. But as contracting work for the Navy goes, this is a big player on the field. There is a pre-solicitation out on SAM. We have the link here. If you visit that, it's going to tell you that, we'll go through the timeline that's expected, but basically they refer you back to the last rolling admission RFP. So we're going to cover the highlights from that. So most of what you see today is based on the latest guidance that we have, which is that RFP from 2021. So I mentioned that SeaPort is a big contract, right? And it's one that you should be tracking because it's doing about $10 billion worth of awards every year. If you are familiar with the history of this program at all, you might remember that this started off as SeaPort E. Back in the SeaPort E days, there were actually zones and your company had to be registered in a certain geographic zone in order to bid on a contract. And so there was always a lot of churn around, okay, well, is this going to come out in zone 1 where I'm registered, or is this going to be zone 5 where I'm not? And with the transition from SeaPort E to SeaPort Next Generation, which is what the NxG stands for, we did away with those zones. And so now it's just, if you get the contract, you can bid on anything. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go here. But obviously, a lot of work gets directed to this vehicle. So if you're doing anything with the Navy or the Marine Corps, this is kind of a must-have contract in your portfolio so that you have it and can leverage it if it makes sense for your company and your capabilities. So who's using it? Not probably surprising if you've done any work with the Navy. It's overwhelmingly NAVSEA, right? Because they control a lot of the systems. And this graphic is from 2019. So that was back when NAVWAR was actually still SPA War or SPA War, depending on how if you're East Coast or West Coast. I feel like they each had a different pronunciation for it. So, but anyways, the commands are doing a lot of business here, and obviously this list that we have detailed here with the lovely pink map of the United States. This comes from the SeaPort, from NAVSEA's brief. And they've listed out some of the specific contracting agencies that use this vehicle. This is not all 106, but this is a pretty good list that just kind of gives you an idea, all right, who's making use of this contract. So you will see a lot of Marine Corps bases called out there as well. Okay, so the functional categories, there's two main areas. There's engineering support services, and there's a whole lot of stuff that falls under that. And then there's program management support services. So if you are a company that's doing anything related to software, systems, program management, acquisition management, budget management, public affairs, even logistics, configuration management, information systems, computer systems. There's even prototyping, modeling and simulation, research and development. These 23 categories actually give this contract a huge scope of support. Notably, what SeaPort is not used for or authorized for is hardware or products. So I don't expect that will change with this next rolling admission, right? They're not looking at expanding the scope to include that. And with there are other vehicles in place, basically, that the Navy can use if they want to incorporate products or hardware as part of what they do. So you might see some small little additions, right? If there's a system that might require a specific software license or something that needs to get installed, every now and then we might see, kind of a one-off thing, but the primary purpose of this contract is not for hardware or for products. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, so that you, as you're looking at this contract, can make sure that you're pursuing something that actually aligns to your company's capabilities and skill sets. Okay, what we know about the timeline, right? We're supposed to see this rolling admission, this next rolling admissions on-ramp get released sometime in March. It's the 27th. They're not late yet. They could still get it out by the end of the week. But it also wouldn't surprise me if this shifted a little bit towards April and everything got just a little bit delayed. We do expect about a 30-day turn, which should be ample time. This is, as I'm going to show you, a pretty straightforward solicitation. It doesn't mean it's necessarily an easy solicitation or one that should be taken lightly. It just means that the requirements are fairly binary. So we do expect the RFP to be open for about a month, and then this is where time will tell how ambitious the program office is being. They think it's going to take about 4 months to go from RFP close to the award of the next gen contract. And that may actually be pretty accurate. The last time they did the full transition in 2018, right, from SeaPort E to SeaPort NxG, it only took 6 months to go from, the old IDIQ to the new IDIQ. So with the on-ramp not really changing a lot of contract structure, I think we could see an award within 4 months. So this is one of those, hopefully we're not waiting, we're not going through the protests, we're not doing all the other, I don't want to say drama, but drama that sometimes comes along with these broader contracts. This should be pretty straightforward, and you should see a return on investment pretty shortly, on a proposal timeline scale anyway, after submission. And then, yeah, they would start up with the effective date of the next gen contracts probably the following month. So they always have this caveat, right? This is just the current plan. Everything's subject to change based on circumstances. Okay, so this is probably what you came for. How do you build a winning proposal for SeaPort NxG? As I mentioned, the eligibility requirements are pretty straightforward. What that means is that they're also very binary. So if you have experience, great. There's a very, I would say, low threshold for needing to demonstrate the breadth of your experience. But it also means that if you don't have the experience, you can't fake it, right? Because they're only looking at the experience from the prime offerer. So if your company does not have recent and relevant experience that aligns to one of those 23 functional categories, and we'll talk more about that in a second, then this would not be the on-ramp for you. There's also a kind of a funny, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer, right? They ask for a technical proposal, but if you look at the solicitation requirements, what they're actually asking for is a no more than 5-page description of an existing contract that you have or subcontract, and a description of that experience and how it maps to one of those functional areas. So it's not past performance because you're not being evaluated on the size of that contract or the quality of the services that you delivered, but you are being evaluated on whether or not you have experience providing direct support to the Navy. And we're going to talk a lot about what qualifies as direct support and what does not qualify as direct support. And if you are an other than small business in that 541330 NICS code, you are going to need to submit a small business subcontracting plan. And as you're going to see with some slides that we get into, SeaPort is very small business centric and very small business friendly. So other elements of this proposal, of course, cover letter, they're going to ask for some basic company registration, company information. The technical proposal, which we've already described, is your narrative about the work that you've done and how it was in direct support of the Navy and the functional area that it tracked to. You will also need to provide some supporting documentation, especially if this was not federal prime work that the government can go to FPDS and easily verify. So if it's a subcontractor work, you can assume that you're going to need to provide the actual subcontract and your statement of work so that you can show the government or show the Navy here that you actually supported them. Per usual, there's going to be an SF-33 that goes in with this. There's a contractor information spreadsheet, which has some basic information about the company. Again, your system for reward management certifications and registrations. So you're going to want to make sure that that's up to date. There's an accounting system questionnaire. And you don't have to have an approved accounting system for SeaPort. They just ask that you fill out the questionnaire because one of the really nice things about this contract is that if you are an awardee on SeaPort, that can actually be the trigger for getting that DCMA audit accomplished. So I know there's sometimes a chicken and egg problem between you can't get the audit done because you don't have a cost plus fixed rate contract, but you can't bid on a cost plus fixed rate contract unless you've got this approved accounting system, right? So SeaPort is that, they will act as your sponsor basically to give you the justification to get the audit, to get that audit taken care of. Okay, and I do see your chat, Albert. Yeah. So what I mean, if not SeaPort task order copy of the contract, sound enough. Yeah, most likely. So they've got some specific guidance in the RFP, and we'll keep a really close eye on that. Once the revised RFP comes out, but we go through this. What constitutes good enough validation or evidence? Because if you've done any of the GWACs, right, like Polaris, or if you were pursuing Oasis Plus, you know that they care less about the things you say and more about the things you can prove. So the task order, the copy of the contract, statement of work, as long as it lists who the prime was, your company, the things you were assigned to do, and it establishes a clear tie between your services and the end customer of the Navy, it'll probably be enough. Or that would be the standard that would be enough. So those are kind of the elements that I want you to think through. Is it clear what the subcontractor number was? Were we clearly listed as the performer? Were our tasks explicitly stated? And does it track back directly to the Navy? Okay, and then so we talked about the accounting system questionnaire, and again, you actually don't have to have any other certifications or facility clearance or approved accounting system in order to get the IDIQ, but you might have to have those for certain task orders, and those requirements will be specified at the task order level. But just in terms of getting on-ramped onto SeaPort, those are not disqualifying certifications. And then we already talked about if you're an other than small business, you need that subcontracting plan. And then if it's applicable, the OCI plan, right? So just the assurance that if you have anything that approaches an OCI concern, organizational conflict of interest, that you have done the due diligence and that there's not going to be any concerns with getting awarded this contract. So for most companies, that OCI is probably not going to apply, but that is something that you in your seat as the bidder do need to spend a little bit of time thinking through just to confirm. Okay, so one note about the teammates, this contractor information spreadsheet, this is where you can list anybody that you want to have be a named teammate on your SeaPort IDIQ. You are not held, you're not beholden to actually performing with these companies, But if you know that there's a company that you work with all the time, or maybe you're going in as the prime and they want to be your subcontractor so that they can build out their Navy experience and go for SeaPort as a prime the next time, you want to submit them with your bid. And again, doesn't commit you to using them, but it streamlines the process of you being able to bid them as an actual subcontractor on future task order bids. So if you're not tracking the distinction here, teammates for this bid are companies that you've been authorized to team with as part of your SeaPort IDIQ bid. If they're a teammate on your SeaPort IDIQ, the conversion to a subcontractor on a specific task order opportunity is very straightforward because you've already shown the registration for these companies. If you are responding to a task order down the line and you've teamed with somebody as a subcontractor who's not been listed on your IDIQ, you just have to go through the contracting officer in order to get that authorization to add them. The other benefit of adding a company as a teammate at the IDIQ level is they will also get access to the SeaPort portal. And so they'll be able to monitor bids, they'll be able to submit their information. They're going to have the same access to see the RFPs as they come out that you might, or that they otherwise wouldn't have if you were just adding them at the task order level. So bottom line, it reduces some admin burden for you and for the contracting office. Okay, so what counts as experience? This is actually, we're going to look at this through the negative lens, right? And talk about what doesn't count as experience. So if you have multiple award contract, or if you have a task order that's been issued, but there's no actual performance on that task order or on that contract, that's not going to qualify. If you have a multiple award contract or BPA and there's no task orders under them, that's not going to be sufficient in saying, yes, you've actually performed services for the Department of the Navy. So if the only funds that have been dispersed to your company are the minimum contract obligations, then you cannot use that experience. So this is something that we see pretty commonly in terms of, past performance or qualifying experience. If you've just been the awardee on an IDIQ, but you haven't actually won any work, you can't say, well, I was on SeaPort E, I never did any work under it, but I got SeaPort E and I got the minimum contract obligation. That's not enough to qualify here. The other interesting thing here is that they will take experience that you have as a subcontractor as long as you can show that the work that you're providing was in direct support of the Department of the Navy. And they've been, if you were monitoring any of the other, I don't know why you would have, but if you're monitoring any of the previous iterations of this contract and you look at the Q&A, they've gone in and very deliberately changed references to the Navy to the Department of the Navy, because that umbrella then encompasses the Marine Corps. At least as it relates to contracting. So you can claim work conducted for the Marine Corps. There are some caveats to that, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Now, this is kind of another area where I'm keeping a pretty close eye for this technical proposal, which, as we've talked, is really more about experience. Right now, the criteria is that it just needs to have been within the last 10 years. There's no minimum dollar threshold, but it does have to map to one of those 23 functional categories or the subcategories within them. You don't have to map to multiple categories, and you don't have to show a certain minimum there, but you have to submit a minimum of 1 and up to 3 projects that clearly show the work that you performed aligned to one of those categories and was for the Navy. Okay, so more notes on being in direct support to the Department of the Navy. I thought the Q&A was really interesting, and it did a good job of highlighting what may and may not qualify here. So this is a common question that comes up. So if the contracting activity issuing the contract was not the Navy, right? Like maybe it was the Air Force because it was an IAC MAC, but the effort performed was in support of the Navy, will that experience count? And they said, well, maybe, right? It's really about the scope of work and who the end customer is. So it's not the issuing activity. That's not the criteria. There's no like automatic, well, the contract starts with N00168 or N00, fill in the DODAC here. Really what they care about is the scope of work. So if the Missile Defense Agency, this is the example that they provide here, if the Missile Defense Agency puts out a contract, but it's for Aegis systems, which are on the BMD ships, right? The DDGs that are out in the Red Sea right now. That work would qualify. They're not worried about the contract number. They need the contract number so they can verify, that you were the performer and what the dates of performance were and all those kind of things. So you still have to provide that, but that's not where they're going to be verifying whether or not the work took place for the Navy. Similarly, with question 54 here, would a SeaPort E task order for work performed on a joint program that included Navy aircraft and some Marine aircraft and some Air Force systems be acceptable as a U.S. Navy experience? And they said it would if the work performed is in direct support of the Department of the Navy. So the second part of this question is what I want to foot stomp here. Just because the contract is issued by Department of the Navy DODAC, even if it was on SeaPort E, that does not guarantee that the work meets the requirements of direct support to the Department of the Navy. So this is going to be why you'll see in our things to do and don't do, we encourage you to pull the actual statement of work and look at the contract documents and make sure that there's a clear, either in the scope or in the objective of the contract, that the Department of the Navy or an agency thereof, one of the offices thereof, is clearly articulated so that it can be unequivocally traced back to the Department of the Navy, regardless of who issued the contract. Okay, so with these functional categories, I know we've already showed you this list once. What I want you to understand about the functional categories in the context of your experience is you just need recent relevant experience in one of these. And if you can show, like, hey, I did a contract, it was for the Navy, we did modeling simulation support, and maybe we did it for NavWar. Great, it was in the last 10 years, you will qualify. And when you get issued your IDIQ, you're not limited to only bidding on future modeling and sim or even just the engineering support services bin. You will be able to bid on engineering support services and program management support services, even just with that one relevant example that fits very nicely into, subcategory 7 under engineering support services. You can show experience in multiple functional categories if you want. There's not necessarily an advantage to do so, right? So again, if you look at the solicitation from the last time, they say at least one, no more than 3. And they're really not interested in you showing a project. Like, they don't care if your engineering support services contract covered categories 1, 5, and 9. Doesn't matter. They don't care if it covered categories 1 from engineering services and 2 from program management support. You just need to make a really clear distinction or alignment to one of these functional categories. And if you're thinking that sounds really straightforward and simple, it is, and it's by design. So a lot of we'll talk about this momentarily, but a lot of the competition on SeaPort actually happens at the task order level. So this first on-ramp is to really make sure that they get a broad and diverse set of bidders at the IDIQ level that they can then compete their task orders within. Okay, so some do's and don'ts. Or the do's and don'ts or do's and don'ts. I got sucked into a little bit of a wormhole yesterday trying to figure out the correct placement of the apostrophe. So don't come for me. I did do some research, and the consensus is there's no consensus in where that goes, because it's different for MLA and APA, and if you're doing it on a website versus in a written document. So I've just listed them all for some comprehensiveness here. Okay, so back to the things we want you to do. Do make sure you keep your content really concise and focused, and stick to the requirements as you're writing this, again, 5-page or less narrative around your experience and how it tracks. Do use our free eligibility checklist. Sometimes we find companies put the cart before the horse a little bit, where they think their SAM registrations are all up to date and good to go, and they reflect the right address, and then they go to bid on something and they realize, oh my gosh, no. And if you've ever gone through the pain of having to get something updated in SAM, sometimes it takes 48 hours, sometimes it takes 4 weeks. So really want you to go through the paces and as part of this eligibility checklist and make sure that all of your ducks are in a row and that you can actually bid on this contract. So that includes double checking all of your registrations ahead of time. The other thing we always encourage bidders to do is to actually gather your contract documents and look at them to make sure they say what you think they say. Because it happens all the time where the contract gets issued and maybe there's a typo or there's something that gets copied and pasted from the last iteration. Maybe the statement of work or the PWS that gets issued to you is actually has the solicitation number on it instead of the award or the contract award number on it. And those little disconnects can just slow down the process or make it harder for the government to verify the actual work that you did. And then think through how you're going to use this vehicle. And we'll talk through that a little bit when we get to the long-term success section. And then also do make sure you keep up with Q&A and amendments. There's usually about a minimum 200 questions that get answered, and usually at least one amendment that goes along with these things just to help clarify or point out discrepancies or streamline things a little bit. So you are going to have to make sure that you're monitoring this opportunity even after it comes out, so that you remain compliant throughout the course of the bid. Things we want you to stay away from: don't skip over the details about the file naming and submission. This is one of those things where you don't have the platform of SeaPort yet in order to submit your proposal, right? So what you end up doing is you end up sending an email that will have a file size restriction to a specific email address based on the last times that they've done this, it's been based on the letter that your company starts with, right? And they'll say, okay, A through G, send it to this address. E, F, G, H, H through M, send it to this address. And there'll be really detailed directions about how to name your files, where to send your email, how big the attachments can be, and what you can include. And you usually can't use zip files because it gets stripped from the Navy email system. So make sure that you are really clear about how to just get your proposal into the hands of the government on time. The other thing we don't want you to do is minimize the importance of the compliance and the category alignment. So it's not going to be just as simple, if you're pointing out the PSC code or the NICS code assigned to the contract, that might be one element of your argument, but you should really be talking about the work that you performed, and you should take a look at the definitions of the functional categories so that you can use some of the same words that the Navy has in terms of defining, okay, what is research and development or prototyping? So how can we make this, the thing that we did and the services that we provide, really look like the things that they're seeking on this contract? You cannot submit multiple bids for this, right? So really you're limited to one per corporate entity. And if you have any questions about that, it's probably better in a one-off setting, because this does come up from time to time. But basically, if you have a corporate entity and multiple subsidiaries, those subsidiaries can't all submit individual bids. Your corporate entity, your headquarters, your main corporate entity should really be the one submitting the bid. Now, the good news is if that corporate entity submits it and gets the IDIQ, all of the subsidiaries are eligible to bid on SeaPort. So there is a right way to do that depending on what your company structure is. But like I said, it might be a better one-on-one conversation just so we can take a look at those details. Okay, and the other thing to do is don't try to do too much. I cannot name another contract, at least not in the last 10 years, that has had a 5-page qualifying experience section, right? They just want you to get straight to the chase. So don't worry about wowing them with, and by the way, here's all the fantastic things we plan to do in the future, and here's our growth plan, and here's why we're so qualified for this. They don't care. This is a very pass-fail style solicitation. Again, specifically for a reason. They're trying to get a big pool of qualified bidders to select from, so they're not interested in down selecting people too early in the process. And then don't waste any time muddling through this, right? Like I mentioned that this is a straightforward solicitation, and you're going to see that when you get into it. But also, we know you're really busy individuals, so this is something that you can load shed pretty easily, right? So if you don't feel like you've got the time and attention, or if you feel like you've got questions that are really specific to your company, and whether or not your experience qualifies, this is a place where Trident can help, right? We're here for you, and we can help navigate that process for you in a pretty low risk setting. So if you've not worked with us before and you're like, I don't even know how I feel about outsourcing proposals, this is a great one to start with, because we can walk you through the process. We can work with you in a very collaborative, but very, it's a very small lift for you. We can take a lot of your information, get you where you need to be, and do it in a way that doesn't add to your plate. Okay, so if you bid on 3 separate subcategories, I want to make sure I understand this section. Let's see here. Okay, circle B. So yeah, something to understand about these functional categories, and I want to make sure that I'm answering this question correctly. So feel free to keep typing or to clarify if I'm not getting to the heart of what you're asking there, Albert. You don't have to show a minimum number of, you don't have to represent across a minimum number of categories. You really just need to pick one subcategory. You can show multiple ones, but what the Navy is looking for is, do you have really clear alignment to just one of these? And then when you get your IDIQ award, you'll be able to bid on everything. So it's not like the case with Oasis Plus, where if you were under the small business pool, you had to apply to the management and advisory domain, and that was separate from the engineering services domain. And so when those awards come out, if you didn't apply and have a qualifying proposal for engineering services, you can't bid on any of those task orders. SeaPort is not like that. When you get the SeaPort IDIQ, it's going to, you get a green card to bid on either engineering task orders or program management support service task orders. And these all tend to come out with the 541330 NICS code anyway. And it's really going to be the PSC that determines what the more specific classification is for the nature of the services. But again, you don't have to say, okay, well, I've got a minimum of these PSCs, or I've got at least 3 of these categories. You just need one, and then you get access to everything. And the other thing to keep in mind is that even if you show, like, your score is going to be the same, whether you show relevance to one category or three categories. So it's not like you would get a satisfactory for one and an outstanding for 3. There's no scale like that. It's very binary. Like, do you qualify? Do you have the experience? Was it recent and relevant? Was it for the Navy? If all of those things are a yes, then great. Here is your award. Okay, and as I mentioned, we do have a free resource for you. It's on the Trident website. It's a very easy address right here. We do ask for your email just so that we've already got your contact information. So in case you have any questions, we know right away, like, yep, this is somebody that came to us from our website and they downloaded the checklist. But that's it. Otherwise, it's completely free, no obligation. And this just helps you organize your thoughts a little bit and double check the things that you need to double check before this RFP comes out. So please do make use of that. And if you are interested in contacting Trident about any services, we're going to start with this checklist. So we can kind of jumpstart things if you've at least taken a look at this and run through it. And I would just encourage you that if you have any questions on that, or if you have things where it says, not sure about this, it'll tell you on the checklist too. Like, just give us a call. We're happy to have a 10-minute conversation about what's going on and if this contract makes sense for you. Okay, the other packages that we do have to help support you with this is, if you just want somebody to put eyes on your project on your proposal before you send it in, and make sure you've done all your file naming correctly, and that you've built your email correctly, and that your experience summary, your technical approach, or your technical proposal rather, actually addresses the criteria, and that an unbiased set of eyes would come to the same conclusion about your work actually qualifying and being for the Navy, we're happy to do that. If you are super busy because your kids are on spring break and you've got stuff coming up in, what quarter are we in? Quarter 3, that you need to get aligned for, and you need to outsource the whole thing, you can do that too. So like I mentioned, this is a very low risk setting to do it. And it's a really great, selfishly, it's a really great warm up for you guys to work with Trident and get to know our team a little bit and how we operate. Because we do try to take a very coaching, training sort of mentality and work with you on things and explain why we're doing things as we do them, so that you know for the next time what to focus on and what to prioritize. Okay. So thinking through this, and I mentioned this as part of the do, and thinking through, like, how would you use this contract over the long run, right? There's some interesting stats that I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time talking about. So this is not my slide. This has too many words for a Rebecca slide, but I do love the information that's on here. So a couple things to highlight. On the SeaPort program, before the Navy issues a task order, every task order solicitation is reviewed by the Deputy for Small Businesses to see if it's a good candidate for a set-aside proposal. So if you're a small business, or if you're one of these set-asides, it's a small disadvantaged business, a woman-owned small business, a HUBS-owned business, or a service-disabled veteran-owned small business, this is where your ears should be perking up, right? Like, every single thing that comes out on this contract, they're going to say, would this be a good thing for a small business to do? Additionally, in part and parcel with that review, SeaPort is committed to having 20% of the obligated dollars for large businesses still go to small businesses. So if you are a large business bidding on SeaPort, one of the most common things that you're going to have to write to in your task order proposals, there's almost always a small business plan. And you have to say, hey, here's who we have on our team. Here's our named teammate that is going to help us meet our 5% overarching goal of dollars going to women-owned small businesses. And here's how we're going to provide them with meaningful contracting opportunities. And by the way, here's our performance against this goal. And if we haven't met, if you have not met your small business contracting goal, you're going to have to explain why. So this is something where if you're a small business and you're maybe not ready to prime, or you're not sure if you're ready to prime, just know that there is still a very welcoming place for you on SeaPort, because the large businesses have to use you and have to justify when they don't. So just want to plant the seed there that, again, every large business, we talked about this as part of the IDIQ submission, they have to turn in a small business plan. And most companies are going to propose what the requirements are, right? Like they can't propose less than 5% to women-owned small business. But some companies are committed to proposing 8%. And then they get measured against that goal as they go. So just know, like I said, if you're not in position to take this contract on and run with it, you can still get work through SeaPort that qualifies you for the next time when you are. So Bridget, to your question about the organization being accepted the vehicle and then being able to bid through any of the organization's entities, it depends. There's some really specific language, again, in the RFP around what a corporate entity is and what it consists of. And where I find the most useful information is actually in some of the Q&A, because people use a specific example, right? Because there are times when the answer is yes, and there's times when the answer is no. So it depends. But if you have questions about that, I'm happy to hang on at the end, or we can schedule a call and just look at the thing. But broadly speaking, what you would do is if you have a headquarters corporate entity that is the parent organization for multiple subsidiary organizations, your best bet is to have that parent organization bid, as long as they're the ones that hold the experience, and then the subsidiaries are eligible as well. If the subsidiary has the experience, it probably depends on how the contract was written, whether or not that would then flow up to the other parent organization. So it tends to be parent organization down is okay. Subsidiary back up is not necessarily the same two-way street. Okay, so a couple other things to foot stomp on this slide. They put it in orange down here, and it's teeny tiny, so I apologize for that font size, but 60% of the competitive orders do not go to the incumbent. That's strikes me as a high turnover rate. So just know that, even if it could be a good news or a bad news story, right? Where I know there are some contracts where, somebody gets their foot in the door and they're there for 15 years. That's not necessarily the story with SeaPort. I mean, there is a chance to unseat incumbents, especially if they're not performing against their small business goals, right? Like these are all things to keep in mind as you're looking at whether or not this contract makes sense for you. The other thing that I want to talk about on this slide, I talked about this being a very small business friendly IDIQ program. And it absolutely is. I mean, 70% of the SeaPort orders go to small businesses. I did actually do the math on here because I don't trust anybody's numbers, right? Or any of their stats. If you do the math for the dollars that went to unrestricted, so the other than small business, or the small business set asides, it's 65%, right? They are using the heck out of small businesses on this contract, especially relative to other contract vehicles. So not only is there a ton of money getting poured into this program, we talked about it being $10 billion per year, right? At least awarded. This is absolutely, there's a really healthy share going to the small businesses. So if that's you, again, your ears should be tingling right now, and the wheels should be turning about how to make use of this contract if the demographics of the client agencies match who you already support today, or who you'd like to support in the future. So what can we do with this information? There are some things you need to know before you wander into these waters, right? Right now on SeaPort NxG, there's over 2,000 primes. Now, 85% of those are small businesses. And we asked our good friends over at C2P, Capture to Proposals, which we can talk about those guys and the good services they provide. But they offered some really interesting insights where they said, okay, yeah, so you've got this huge pool of primes. 85% of them are small businesses. This all sounds like a really good news story. When you do the math though, and you look at who the distinct awardees, and it's actually confirmed on the previous slide, right? Less than 16% of the people who hold a SeaPort contract have actually won a task order. So this different vendors winning an award, this 378, if you divide that out with the 2,416 people who have, or companies, entities who have a contract, only about 16% of them have been successful in winning a task order. We do have some recommendations about ways that you could improve that, and I'll talk about those in just a second. And then, looking across at how competitive these are, this is where the data varies a little bit. If you're looking specific to PSCs, the average of proposals received is about 4. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. If we zoom out and we just look at the whole contract, we're seeing closer to 34 bids being the average. Now, again, if it's a niche service, or if it's for a program office, or if it's for something that's a really large contract, that number is going to go down because there's just not as many qualified bidders for it. But you can expect some pretty intense competition at the task order level. The other interesting thing is that the top 5 contractors are doing about a quarter of the work on SeaPort. So this isn't something where you step 1, get the IDIQ, step 2, guaranteed profit. Like, you are going to have to put some legwork in, as you would with any IDIQ, to make sure that this vehicle is really delivering the value that you need it to. So I've already mentioned this multiple times, but the task order level competition is going to be intense. And what that means is that if you're a small business, or if you're a large business, having deliberate, effective capture is going to be essential. You have to walk the halls. You have to get to know the players. You have to make the case. If you are a small business, you absolutely have to engage with the contracting activities and the small business representatives. And that includes responding to the market surveys and the RFIs. We already talked about how every task order solicitation goes before that small business office, and they say, is anybody qualified to do this? If they send out a market survey and you don't reply to it, and you're a small business and you don't say, hey, my company could do this, even though it's OCONUS or even though it's top secret, like, I am a qualified bidder in this field, they're going to say, oh, well, we asked, nobody raised their hand and said they were eligible for this, so I guess we won't put it in the set aside, or we won't release this as a set aside. And then now you've just opened up your meal for everyone to eat. So don't let anybody else steal your lunch. If you're a small business, you absolutely should be leveraging these contracts, taking advantage of the runtime leading up to the task order release, and making sure that you're thinking through the relationships that you form and what makes you differentiated, right? Because we saw, there's 60% turnover on these contracts. So the opportunity is absolutely there to unseat somebody if you're putting in the steps. And I just like this meme. There actually is not a minimum contracting threshold. Sometimes these larger IDIQs will say, hey, if you don't do X number of dollars of business, over in the first 5 years, and you get off ramped. It doesn't really work like that for SeaPort, but the award, the base contract that you get is a 5-year contract. And if you don't do any work on SeaPort, then you're probably not going to get your option years exercised. So there is a little bit of a minimum participation here, but it's not an explicit dollar value listed in the RFP. So don't get let go due to lack of sales. Okay. If you want more information, we have a whole section of our website that's dedicated to this. If you go to our tridentproposals.com website, you'll see a contract vehicles tab at the top. You can download our free eligibility checklist right there. If you want to purchase a package, you can actually do it right on the website. It's super easy. We'd love to get in touch with you sooner rather than later, just so we can have these preliminary conversations, make sure you're barking up the right tree. The last time we did an on-ramp, we had a 100% success rate with all of the companies that submitted a proposal. And this is probably not something you're going to hear a proposal company say a lot, but we actually talked some people out of bidding because they just didn't qualify. And we said, no, don't put your resources here. Go talk to some teammates. Go, focus your efforts on something else, because you're just going to get told no, right? So we were able to save them a lot of time and energy, not pursuing a bid that they weren't qualified for. So we will be very candid with you. We will be your bad cop that keeps you honest, so that, again, we will be good stewards of your resources, right? That's the thing that balances out, is we don't want to see you spend your time and energy pursuing something that you're ultimately not going to be successful in. So we're happy to have those conversations. If you have any other questions, please feel free. You can email me directly. It's just Rebecca@tridentproposals.com. You can check out our website. We have a YouTube channel. You can watch all of my webinars where I have many more memes and puns. This one was light today. But yeah, you can check us out on Twitter, LinkedIn. We're constantly posting a lot of really great content. and we would just love to connect. I do want to give a special thanks to some of the partners who promoted our event today. So I already mentioned Capture Two Proposals, C2P, and then the Vespa Group. So if you got referred by either one of those companies, I would love to know about it so that we can give them a special thanks. But otherwise, I am happy to turn the floor over to you guys. We've got about 8 minutes left, and then you can go to the SeaPort website as well. So I'll just leave that up. But yeah, happy to answer any other questions or attempt to field any other questions that you have on the spot about SeaPort and this next rolling admission.